March 12, 1925, Guangzhou, Republic of China. Sun Yat-sen is dead, and with it, the question of what happens next arises. With the country in tatters and no single leader, a decision had to be made. During this time, the Japanese were aggressively eyeing up the northern regions of China. Ever since absorbing the Empire of Korea in 1910, they had begun spreading their influence across the north. And so, it was time. Time for the Kuomintang to step up and bring the warlords to their knees. In the last episode, we talked about the fighting between factions of warlords in China, the attempts at establishing a southern government, and the death of Sun Yat-sen. However, that was only the beginning, and the fight for China was yet to come. But first, let's talk about Puyi. To catch you up onto speed, Puyi was the 5-year-old emperor of China when his dynasty was overthrown, but conditions were better than expected. After the uprising, the new government allowed the Qing court to remain, gave them funding to maintain the palace, and protected imperial tombs. How did Puyi react? Well, he had no idea. Life had barely changed. No one had informed him that China was now a republic, and I bet he couldn't even say the words at the time. He was still revered, though, and kept his traditional Confucius Chinese education. In February 1913, Empress Dowager Lung Yu died. Yuan Shikai came to the Forbidden City to pay his respects. While there, Puyi saw him, and realized that the man who had once kowtowed to him was now commanding armies and telling people what to do. Puyi hated him, and grew bitter and jaded. In 1917, as previously talked about, Zhang Jun's army marched into Beijing and proclaimed the restoration of the Qing dynasty, with 11-year-old Puyi as the emperor. A new cabinet was formed, and Puyi was emperor again. But soon, Beijing was surrounded, and, days later, the Forbidden City was bombed. The imperial court surrendered, and Puyi was no longer the emperor again. However, in 1919, he would see his vision of the world change, when a British diplomat by the name of Sir Reginald Johnston came to the Forbidden City. He was appointed by the imperial court as Puyi's new tutor. Puyi would grow fond of him. He was enthusiastic about learning English and picked it up quite quickly. He was interested in Western technology and even loved phoning random strangers in Beijing late at night with the new phone that was installed in the palace. He also had a cinema installed and watched movies on a projector, annoying the court. That same year, Puyi had begun to lose sight, and was inspected by a Western doctor. Despite protests from the court, Puyi was eventually given glasses. By this point, he grew bored with the Forbidden City and wanted to escape. Puyi's life took another significant turn when he entered into a marriage, at the age of 16. Don't worry, this was normal for the time, apparently. Puyi was married to Wanrong, a member of the Manchu nobility. This union was not just a personal milestone, but also a strategic decision that was mainly used to reinforce the ties between the Qing dynasty, or what remained of it, and the remnants of its former 8 banner cliques. Wanrong was chosen for her lineage, but also her looks, as she was set to represent the dynasty itself. Even if things did not start out as their best, as Puyi ran away during the wedding ceremony and needed to finish it later. Initially, Puyi and Wanrong shared moments of youthful happiness, but the reality of being a displaced emperor loomed over him. Puyi struggled with the expectations placed upon him and the chaotic environment outside the walls of the Forbidden City. Wanrong, though supportive, couldn't fully alleviate the burdens of being the remnants of a bygone era. As political tensions in China escalated, and Puyi felt the weight of his lost power, their marriage would also be tested in the changing tides of the nation. In 1923, The issue of theft was brought to Puyi, who ordered an inventory of all items to be kept, as well as storing most of the important ones in a safe house. However, a few months later, a fire broke out in that safe house, and the eunuchs claimed that all items were lost in the fire. Puyi was outraged and ordered all eunuchs to be banished, with a few remaining for maintenance. However, the palace began to fall apart as grass grew everywhere and paint fell off. Later that year, the Great Kanto earthquake struck Japan, and, despite the richness of Japan, they still needed aid. Puyi ended up donating vast sums of money to the Japanese, and, in exchange, the Japanese sent delegates to personally thank him. They realized during the visit the emperor was easy to manipulate and could be used in the future. On October 23, 1924, warlord Fang Yusheng took Beijing and pushed Puyi out, giving him 3 hours to pack. This would spell the end of his time in the Forbidden City and would leave him homeless. For the first time in 504 years, the Forbidden City was without an emperor. 2 concubines actually refused to leave and left 2 weeks later. They relocated to Puyi's father's house, and Puyi could now meet his other siblings and see his brother again. Reginald Johnston left China and returned to British service, but would visit him in the later years. A few days later, Puyi relocated to the Japanese legation in Beijing, as they had promised him protection. This was mainly just so that the Japanese could use him later down the road for some plans they had. Eventually, Puyi was then loaded up onto a train and taken to the Japanese concession in Tianjin, and that's where we will leave off. Meanwhile, there is also a question in the south. Who would lead the Kuomintang? Following the death of Sun Yat-sen on March 12, 1925, the Kuomintang found itself in a tumultuous power struggle. Sun's death left a significant leadership vacuum within the Kuomintang, leading to internal conflicts and a power struggle among its prominent leaders. 2 key figures emerged in the struggle for power, Chiang Kai-shek and Wang Jingwei. Chiang, a military leader and Sun's protege, aimed to consolidate the KMT's power and unify China under a nationalist government. He believed that the KMT needed to adopt a more military-focused approach to neutralize the warlords, while Wang, on the other hand, favored a more moderate and reformist strategy. Their differing visions caused a rift within the party, leading to tensions that would shape the KMT's future direction. Amid this internal strife, the rising threat of Japanese expansion loomed, particularly in the northern regions of China. Japan had already established significant control over Manchuria and was increasingly assertive in its territorial ambitions. This scenario called for urgent action. The KMT needed to address both internal divisions and the external threat posed by Japan to stabilize the nation. Chiang decided if he could be the one to fulfill Sun's northern expedition, he could become leader of the Kuomintang unquestionably. In May 1925, strikes took place in Shanghai, calling for the end of the international settlement in the city. After British troops fired on the protesters, this caused strikes in Hong Kong and Guangzhou, which was a good recruitment ground for the Communist Party, which was partnered with the Kuomintang. Chiang asked for international support and got more from the Soviets due to their partnership with the Communists. Chiang prepared for a new northern expedition, which got him support in the party. By this point, he had basically become leader, but not officially. On July 1st, 1926, the National Revolutionary Army launched an invasion of warlord Wu Beifu's territory, and on July 9th, Chiang Kai-shek was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the National Revolutionary Army. The northern expedition had begun. The KMT forces advanced quickly from their base in Guangdong to Wu-controlled Hainan, capturing the province. Changsha was a bit harder to capture, but fell on the 11th of July. At the same time, most of Wu Beifu's forces were preoccupied with fighting at the Nankou Pass near Beijing against the Guominjun, a breakaway Zhili faction sympathetic to the KMT. Given the strength of the Fangtian clique, it was a gamble for sure. There was no telling if the Fangtians and the Zhili would work together to defeat the NRA, but for now, things remained relatively calm. They used speed to their advantage, with the capture of the Yangtze port of Yezhou on the 22nd of August 1926. Henan came under complete KMT control, paving the way for an advance into Wuchang along the route of the Beijing-Guangzhou Railway. On August 29th, Wu launched a counterattack as the KMT was surrounding Wuchang. This was unsuccessful, and on September 2nd, he and most of his army left the city, with a small number staying and holding out for a month. Wu begged other Zhili generals for help, but a delay in mobilization gave the KMT some time to build up. General Sun Changfang gathered his forces to protect Nanjing, the capital of Jiangxi province. Intense fighting broke out, and the city changed hands several times. Many of Chang's officers from the new academy had been killed, but just then, as they were losing battle, the government of Zhejiang rose up and declared independence. Chang, being a native of Zhejiang, was able to convince them to side with the KMT. Though it was crushed, the diversion of troops caused the fall of Nanjing and Fujian province. During this, Sun had gone up to Tianjin to convince local warlords. Some accepted, but it took them a while to march south. So, as the NRA was taking land throughout Fujian, 60,000 troops massed in Anhui on the 1st of September 1926. Fangqiang Clique and Zhili cliques formerly allied, forming the National Pacification Army. This alliance was heavily unpopular with locals in regions under Sun's control, with Zhang Songchan's northern troops viewed as invaders. Sun himself even said, "The people don't necessarily like the KMT, but they sure do hate us." The Zhejiang autonomy movement continued, and a meeting of influential provincial figures, nominally loyal to Sun, was held in Shanghai on the 8th of December. On December 11th, 1926, Zhejiang commander Zhou Finkui announced his defection to the NRA. This started a cascade of defections, leading to Zhejiang's declaration of independence from Sun's United Provinces. Zhejiang was immediately given autonomous status by the Guangzhou government in response. Sun charged into Zhejiang and took it back from the NRA very quickly. By the 10th of January, the majority of Zhejiang rebel forces had retreated to Guizhou. To relieve the besieged rebels, He Yingqing pushed his Fujian-based forces into Zhejiang, halting Sun's advance. The rebel and KMT forces merged under the command of Bai Chongxi, who launched a counter-offensive on the 20th of January 1927. After a fierce campaign through Zhejiang, they took back the province by the end of February. Many of Sun's northern troops, demoralized by defeat, broke ranks and streamed north, looting towns and villages. Following the victory, Chang ordered an offensive into Nanjing and Shanghai. First, they severed the railroad connections between Nanjing and Shanghai, cutting off both armies, while Sun was confronted with the defection of his navy and a communist general strike in Shanghai. Intense fighting took place in Songjiang, just outside the city, but on the 22nd of March 1927, Bai's forces marched into Shanghai victorious. The Fangqiang support operation had proven to be a costly operational disaster for the northern warlords, whose armies had suffered heavy casualties, forcing them to retreat across the Yangtze. However, the strike in Shanghai was controversial as it caused 300 deaths, leading to the nationalists' further distrust of the communists. On the 24th of March 1927, the NRA marched into Nanjing completely unopposed after the NPA had evacuated the day before. Almost immediately after the arrival of them, mass anti-foreigner riots broke out in the city. In an event that came to be known as the Nanjing Incident, British and American naval forces were sent to evacuate their respective citizens, causing a naval bombardment of the city that left it burning and at least 40 people dead. Again, the KMT accused the communists of planning the unrests. This incident would spell the end of the First United Front. By this point, the nationalist government had moved to Wuhan. Wuhan was home to the most left-wing factions of the United Front, including Wang Jingwei and the Communists. The city was also new, having been formed out of several smaller cities such as Hankou and Wuchang. The government in Wuhan had dismissed Chiang as leader of the NRA, but he didn't care, and instead continued across the Yangtze. The final success of the first phase occurred when Chiang ordered his troops to take the Anhui capital of Hefei. The aid of the Fangtian armies prevented Sun Chengfeng's army from completely collapsing, and they eventually managed to regroup and strengthen their forces for the next phase of the conflict, launching a counteroffensive on April 3, 1927. The left wing of the Kuomintang had advised that a small force be sent to Nanjing to pacify Chiang, but put that plan on hold following Wang Jingwei's return from exile in Europe. Wang, who had traveled back to China at the urging of members of the government, was greeted in Shanghai by Chiang Kai-shek, who offered a power-sharing deal. Wang said he would consider the deal and boarded a ship for Wuhan on the 7th of April. He arrived on the 10th, where Wuhan leadership eagerly greeted him. However, Chiang was already planning for the end of the communists as this happened. Chiang had gone back to his roots in Shanghai, connecting with an old gang known as the Green Gang, and began planning to rid Shanghai of communists. Between the 12th and 14th of April, hundreds of communists were arrested and killed by gangs in Shanghai, an event that became known as the Shanghai massacre. In retaliation, hundreds of nationalists in Guangzhou were killed in retaliation. Both events effectively ended the alliance between the nationalists and communists and the First United Front, reducing the communists from 60,000 to 10,000. Wang Jingwei condemned the purge and formalized the split between the KMT rightists and leftists. With Nanjing under constant artillery bombing from the National Pacification Army, a series of offensives was conducted by the NRA on the 10th of May, 1927. The NRA 1st and 6th Armies crossed the Yangtze into Anhui, and, on the 16th of May, Li Zongren, based in western Anhui, led the 7th Army toward Hefei. The Wuhan government launched similar attacks in Hainan, pushing back the NPA to Yancheng by the 20th of May. Li Zongren had also captured Bangpu, whilst Chiang unleashed a four-prong attack into Jiangsu toward the warlord power base in Shandong, forcing the NPA to retreat over the Yellow River. Feng Yuxiang eventually captured the Beijing-Hankou Railway and used this to travel south to meet with Wang Jingwei in Wuhan and Chiang Kai-shek in Nanjing, announcing his forces would follow the orders of Chiang Kai-shek. He also purged communists in his areas he controlled, crippling the Wuhan government's ability to push north. Wu Peifu retreated his remaining forces into Sichuan, where he announced his retirement. On the 5th of July, NPA General Yan Yichen defected to the NRA, but failed to convince his 10,000 soldiers based in Qingdao to do otherwise. At Wuhan, Chiang Xingxi began to mobilize his troops for an attack on the Nanjing government. Aware of this threat, Chiang recalled troops from the Shandong border in an effort to block Tang. In turn, the NPA launched an attack on Chiang in early July, reclaiming much of the territory they had lost and making plans to cross the Yangtze. With this, the Nanjing and Wuhan governments began reconciliation talks. The Wuhan government purged communists and expelled Soviet advisors in order to make up with the Nanjing government. They also agreed that the capital would indeed be in Nanjing. In response, at exactly 2 a.m. on August 1st, 1927, Zhou Enlai and several other CCP leaders attacked the city of Nanchang and took the city after 4 hours. As KMT forces made their way to the city, they underwent what was known as the Little Long March, retreating to the Jinggang Mountains. As the two KMT factions tried to merge, the NPA launched troops to the south bank of the Yangtze on August 27th, 1927, moving south to attack Shanghai, cutting off contact between Nanjing and Shanghai by destroying the railroad. Wuhan sent its troops north, trying to flank Sun. He and Qing approached from Shanghai, with his forces encircled and unable to continue to move north across the river. The NPA was forced to abandon the Longtang railway station on the 30th of August. In a desperate attempt at resistance, Sun rallied his 40,000 remaining troops and launched a counteroffensive on the 31st of August, but it failed, and his 40,000 troops surrendered. With reconciliation talks beginning, the Wuhan government was dissolved on September 15, 1927. Wang Jingwei refused to join the new government, as did Tang Sangxi, who became an independent warlord in his own right, controlling Hubei, Hunan, Jiangxi, and parts of Anhui. Meanwhile, Shanxi aligned itself with the Wuhan government, adding 100,000 troops to Nanjing's ranks now that they were merged. Tang's forces, however, prevented any forward northern advance by the NRA, and so, in October, it moved to quash this rebellion. Tang was defeated in early November and left for exile in Japan. With this, the northward push continued, reaching Bangpu by October. Meanwhile, in Guangzhou, a communist uprising took place on September 11, 1927, but it did not last long and was crushed in 2 days. The Nanjing government began to get suspicious of Wang Jingwei, who subsequently left for France on the 17th of December. Chiang's return as commander-in-chief, with the military success of Chiang's Whampoa troops, proved that the northward advance would continue. The various KMT factions agreed to recognize the legitimacy of Chiang's leadership. Consequently, Chiang was officially invited to resume command of the NRA on the January 1, 1928. Chiang ordered his foreign staff to talk with Japan to prevent their further intervention in Shandong. He also reorganized the NRA into 4 armies made up of the armies of former warlords. On April 17th, the northern advance went full force. Sun attempted a 2-pronged counterattack to the south, but failed and retreated to the capital of Jinan. By this point, Sun's troops, suffering a lack of food and walking on the soles of their shoes, were basically dead. By this point, the Japanese had moved their troops from Qingdao to Jinan via railway, taking advantage of the situation, basically invading Shandong. The NRA had surrounded Jinan, and the belligerent NPA retreated to the north bank of the Yellow River. Amidst looting and outbreaks of violence, at this point there were already 3,000 Japanese troops in Jinan, guarding the 2,000 Japanese civilians in the city. After the NRA told the Japanese they would guarantee the safety of Japanese civilians, the Japanese army retreated. But while retreating, they began to fight, and a full-on battle took place in the city. The fighting continued with dozens of civilians dying. The First Army bypassed the city and headed towards Beijing. The Second Army went around the Beijing-Hankou Railway, and the Third Army moved from its base in Shanxi to Beijing. The First and Second Armies met in Zhankou, the gateway to Beijing. However, the Fangtian forces launched a counteroffensive with 200,000 men. The Japanese warned that any fighting in Manchuria would result in an invasion. The Fangtian forces pushed the NRA back 48 kilometers. Zheng, wary of KMT propaganda that linked him with the Japanese massacre at Jinan, responded that he would not recognize Japan's interests in Manchuria. With that, he began to withdraw forces from the North China Plain, and the Japanese persuaded Zhang to leave for Manchuria by train on June 4th, arranged by them, of course. And, as he rode out of Beijing, a bomb exploded under the train, killing him. Though the line of succession meant that his son, Zhang Zhuoling, was able to succeed him, it was over at that point. Sun Shangfang unleashed the final blow to the NPA when he withdrew his troops from the defensive line and fled to Japanese-controlled Dalian on the 6th of June. The NRA marched into Beijing the day after with no resistance. Zhang Zhuolin announced the surrender of the Fangtian Clique. However, some warlords in Shandong declared war on the Fangtian Clique. Supported by Japan, the Shandong Zhili army moved from its base at Changsha, crossed the Luan River, and invaded Manchuria, but after 6 days, they were pushed back by the KMT. They refused to surrender and ended up having to be mopped up by the NRA. Zhang Zuoling officially declared his allegiance with the Nanjing government in the 29th of December 1928, marking the formal end of the Northern Expedition. In Manchuria, the beautiful five-color flag was replaced with the blue sun, white sky flag, signaling the unification of China under one government. The Northern Expedition had been completed, and it was an NRA victory. Quickly, Chiang reorganized the government for peacetime and sought to cut the NRA forces in half. A general meeting of the Kuomintang was held in Nanjing from the 8th to 14th of August. At this meeting, also attended by non-KMT members, Fang and Yan Jishan, the primary topic of that was centralization. Chiang desired to take the power that had been exercised through various warlords and political entities and concentrate it in the power of the central government. In an effort to curtail the provincialist tendencies of the warlord era, eventually it was agreed to that it could only happen if the former warlords relinquished their powers. This is agreed to, but implementing them in practice would be a challenge that would take a few years. On the 10th of October 1928, the new peacetime government was launched, and Chiang was appointed President of the Republic of China, a position he would hold for the rest of his life. Meanwhile, in the north, the people of Manchuria were getting ideas. The idea of an independent state in the region was gaining momentum, and the Japanese were interested. In the south, the communists are still there, and they were prepared to take power by all means necessary, both setting the stage for the coming 20 years of war. That is for next episode.